So as a brief summary, Jonathan is a chartered town planner and a recognised practitioner of the urban design group, and he heads up the urban design team at Cambridge City Council with quite a few qualifications in landscape design and urban design. You certainly know your stuff, and you've been working with Cambridge City Council since 2002. The urban design team plays quite a significant role in helping to shape the city's built environment, and as head of the team, Jonathan leads that sort of role, and you work on a wide range of projects, including the Abode and Aura developments and the regeneration of the CB1 district around Cambridge Station. We also have Jonathan Gimblett, who is Associate Director of Countryside Properties Central New Homes and Communities. With over 17 years of experience in a wide variety of aspects of development process, he led the planning and design teams for all of Countryside's housing developments at Great Knighton, which comprises over 1,000 mixed tenure new homes, including the 2015 RIBA East award-winning Abode and the 2018 RIBA East award-winning Aura neighbourhood that you're going to hear about today. And finally, Mike has over 20 years of experience from a range of sectors, including residential, commercial and healthcare. And as design director at Tate Hindle, Mike is a champion of good design and its ability to enrich lives. So Mike's working, or has been working, with Countryside to create 647 new homes, including, I believe, 40% affordable housing over 3 phases. And Mike's currently serving as the chair of the RIBA East London Architects Group, as well as a civic trust assessor and a corresponding member of the RIBA Housing Group. So you certainly know about housing. So I'll hand over now to Jonathan.
Very much, Tom. So as Tom says, I'm an urban designer and I've been with the team for quite a while now, so I've managed to see a lot of these sites come through from kind of outline all the way through to detail design stage. What's interesting, I think, is the diversity of my role. I can be looking at a kind of an area-based framework, and 1 minute I can be looking at kind of a drip detail the next. So I think this whole thing around kind of getting the ingredients right on places is actually a really wide remit of our team. I'm really pleased to be able to talk you through Aura as a case study for the making of a new community. It's been a kind of long process, not just for Aura, but I think the whole of sort of Southern Fringe. I'll go on to that in a minute, but also how the collaboration has been a key ingredient in creating an effective framework for good design. So Aura at Great Knighton, a collaborative process, that's what this is all about. And I thought, as with all presentations, Stephen Googled something, I Googled something, and I put collaboration in now, obviously. 1, the action of working with someone to produce something. Sounds good. 2, traitorous cooperation with an enemy. Now, it's kind of interesting, isn't it, when you start to think about what the balance is between kind of where we stand within the kind of local authority view. You know, sometimes we can't please the public, sometimes we can't please the developer. I'm really hoping that as we kind of talk through Aura, it's a demonstration that it's all about the former and not the latter. I'm going to talk around how community involvement design review, various guidance documents have combined to help create the new development at Great Knighton, and hopefully it will demonstrate what can be achieved when we work in that sort of positive and collaborative way. So a little bit of history, background. The Southern Fringe Area Development Framework was a kind of key document which helped to kind of guide and form the whole of the release sites around the southern edge of the city. Before then, there was we talked about Greenbelt earlier and the importance of it. There was a comprehensive review of the Greenbelt around Cambridge in sort of 2002 to 2003. The Greenbelt hadn't been reviewed for sort of 25, 30 years. So there was a real pressure, not only from kind of housing numbers, employment sites, but also a real pressure to create good quality, high quality places, and was one of the key reasons that our team was set up, and I became the first badged urban designer at City Council. Those Greenbelt sites were allocated as part of the 2006 local plan, and as I say, we went on as the urban design team to start to produce the Southern Fringe Area Development Framework. It was all about creating a coordinating strategy for the sort of 5 sites that formed the Southern Fringe. So you've got Jumpton Meadows, you may have heard of, Glebe Farm, you had Clay Farm, which has become Great Knighton, had the Bell School site. They were all sort of residential sites with a mixed-use component on the larger ones. And then obviously we've got the Cambridge Biomedical Campus, which is a massive growth site for the University Hospital and the NHS. I think what's really important is that it required extensive community and stakeholder input. And that task is not to be underestimated. We had a series of workshops starting, I think probably about 3 weeks after I joined the council, where we started to engage with a whole range of stakeholders, from the development industry right the way through to residents' associations and other interest groups. What the framework had to do was to think about kind of community infrastructure. It had to think about kind of design principles, and we started to embed right at that early stage where kind of key movement routes would be going, how kind of green corridors, which are real sort of characteristic of Cambridge, would be embedded into the new places we were creating. I think when we talk about collaboration, cooperation, it's really important, you know, getting the community on side. And obviously there was hostility around release of Greenbelt land, but there was also kind of a wider conversation around how you demonstrate the benefits of good places, of new development, things like improved community facilities, things like transport infrastructure. And actually there was a bit of a kind of turnaround, and on the screen there you can see that the document with the combine harvest on it, which I think was actually one of the fields which became Clay Farm, Great Knighton, was the Trumpton Residents Association actually starting to produce their own vision for what they wanted these new places to be about. So Clay Farm outline, I've given you the reference in case you want to look it up. I think it's really important. Clay Farm became Great Knighton, Countryside rebadged it. And in terms of kind of how we started to create that framework, so we had the Southern Fringe Area Development Framework, we had some really good policies in our local plan, but you kind of need to go beyond that. And so using parameter plans, we established kind of movement and access, density, land use, landscape. And really kind of important that those things are set out. I think what was interesting, you know, Countryside had a really good track record of delivering high quality in the city. We've got the Accordia development was already onto your belt. So I think, you know, they were keen to come to the table and to maintain a really strong design-led approach to the development at Clay Farm. I think to that end, it was quite an easy kind of push to say, well, could we start to have a parameter plan that says something about urban design principles, which was really important actually, because these things can be quite dry, they can be quite sterile. And the idea that you start to create a sort of hierarchy to those kind of beige, they're often kind of beige blobs on a plan, aren't they? Where is frontage? Where are important buildings going to be? And that acted as a very kind of natural bridge then to a design code, which we worked with, and I'll say a little bit more in a minute. I think what's really important is that I think the outline started to set out really clearly what the expectations of the local authority as well as the developer were. And I think that's all about kind of de-risking it and demystifying it to an extent. So here is the Clay Farm Design Code approved in 2011. It was a key document and it was conditioned as part of the outline approval. So as part of that the developer was required to produce the code, but it wasn't about them going away and working on their own. They worked in a really collaborative way with us, the urban design team, to the extent I think we even came down to your offices a couple of times and we started to input what the level of detail, what the content should be. We produced, in kind of pump priming that, a guidance note which was really picking up on what the design coding kind of pilot projects were doing at the time in 2006, 2008, I think it was, to think about a time-efficient process. So then, again, it's about kind of de-risking it. People could see when things needed to be delivered by. What's really important is, and I think this is because we had the confidence in the developer, we could and there was that commitment to it being a design-led approach. It didn't need to be overly prescriptive, and we've all seen codes where they kind of take you to a street and they say this was delivered by one developer and this was delivered by another, and look, you can't see the difference. And it's kind of gone down to kind of door knockers and window lintels and all these sorts of things, and it's sort of impressive. But actually, if you're going to take a design-led approach to something and allow architects the freedom to kind of interpret the parameter plans that we had, also bring through kind of best practice, you can't have something overly prescriptive. It's important to say that as well as that we kind of tested the code as it came through using the abode development, which was down to the south of the site. So moving on to Aura, obviously Jonathan from Countryside is going to say something about Aura from the developer perspective, and Mike's going to be saying something more about the design side of things. But from a local authority perspective, I think it does demonstrate really effectively how a collaborative approach achieves a good outcome. It used, as I said, the parameter plans, it used the design code, being compliant with both, but there was freedom within all of those documents, particularly the code, to allow adjustment to be made. And I think we moved streets around, we changed the hierarchy of some of those streets actually to create a better outcome. And you can only start to do that when you have zoomed into the kind of site planning level that you need to as part of a reserve matters. I think the other side of it is around kind of getting the ingredients right, getting the details right, and some of it is actually around kind of functional design. So we spend a lot of our time, it feels, talking about bins, bikes and cars, the BBC, but actually once you've got these things resolved, there is then freedom to think about kind of architectural expression and these sorts of things, and there's a confidence that those kind of functional parts of development will be okay. As part of the Aura Reserve Matters process, it went through the Cambridgeshire Quality Panel, and Stephen said something kind of briefly about it, and it's been on other presentations this morning. I won't go on and on about it, but I think it was really important to sort of set the expectation about growth, about the quality of growth on our sites in the Cambridgeshire area. It has a slightly sort of wider remit than some quality panels, so it does look at community, connectivity, climate and character. I think it was interesting, the discussion or the conversation earlier around how do these things link to policy. I think in a way a quality panel, a quality charter can be slightly independent of policy. I think it can challenge, it can sometimes ask questions which aren't typically around kind of is it policy compliant, and we have really kind of good, useful discussions with the panel as they review things. The other side of collaboration is that as a city authority in the South Cambs, we have a Joint Development Control Committee, and again they put a lot of emphasis on what the quality panel has said based on what the quality charter sets out. And I think when we looked at Aura, it was really good. I seem to remember the chair of the panel just saying, let's just get on and build it, which I think is quite a good outcome of that process. So finally from me around kind of community infrastructure, and I think it's important to say that collaboration doesn't stop with the approval of a reserve matters or an outline or whatever. And it's really important that you're kind of supporting the making of a new community as it develops. The slide here shows how we take that sort of joined up approach to the provision of infrastructure. You can see around kind of the community centre at Hobson's Square. That's actually run by the Trumpton Residents Association, and they share the responsibility for other community facilities in and around Trumpton. So building those things, bringing those together, thinking around kind of extended schools models, so that you're actually offering something more on those sites. They're not sterile after kind of 3:30. They're actually reaching out to the communities that are around them. Another key point is around community development workers on the ground, supporting the new and existing communities. And then a community forum set up, which is a real place for people to kind of ask questions and to get issues resolved. I think we've all some of us anyway have been to these things and some have survived. But I think, you know, it's really important that people are passionate actually about the issues that affect them, and you need to give people the chance to speak around it and to kind of air those problems. What's interesting is when it was first set up, it was much more about existing residents, and now actually the balance has kind of flipped to the new places. And I think the final thing from me is to say that kind of new communities aren't created. We don't just say, here's a community. What we're doing is kind of building a kind of a framework for them. They're going to develop over time, and that's why that sort of long-term involvement from the local authority in particular is key. Thank you.
So, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jonathan Gimlett. I'm Associate Director of London Planning at Countryside Properties, New Homes Communities Division. Obviously, Jonathan's talked a fair bit today about sort of policy and the history background as to how Great Knighton and that development came about. Mike's here. Mike's going to talk you through the design. So I thought I would actually talk a little bit around the process that we went through. But that's something that's not often talked about in these sort of sessions, or particularly with anybody outside of developer type clients. So first of all, a little bit about Countryside. We've been around 60 years. We are a PLC. We have a £1.5 billion cap, market capitalisation. We're divided into two regions. We've got a New Homes and Communities division, which is the part of the business I work for, and increasingly we've got a partnership division which focuses on working with a variety of local authorities across the southeast of the country, London, northwest and Midlands, through a recent acquisition of a partnerships developer there that we've made as a group. Most of the houses that Countryside deliver on its projects are for owner-occupiers and housing associations, albeit we do have a growing interest in private rented sector, and we're working with Sigma, particularly up in the northwest of the country, to deliver PRS accommodation. So we've got quite a good understanding of tenure, how to create communities. So, Countryside in Cambridge. Jonathan sort of touched on our history. Probably the first major scheme the company had done in Cambridge was Accordia. A picture here of the project. It was a redevelopment of a former MAP office, former Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Food offices on Brooklands Avenue. If anybody remembers what that looked like 15 years ago, it was a sea of yellow, custard yellow porta cabins, if I remember rightly, with some very nice trees and actually quite a challenging context. And there was a desire coming from the City Council and the then Head of Planning, Peter Studdart, to see a really high quality development that built upon some of the traditions of Cambridge character. So within there we had things like grand terraces, Muse streets, feature apartment blocks in key locations. Accordia itself is quite a dense urban form, and we're actually coming at a density of around 40 dwellings per hectare on that project. It also features a number of shared garden areas and communal areas which help to create that community feel. And it was the winner of the 2008, so 10 years ago, Sterling Prize. And it's still the only housing scheme that has won the Sterling Prize, as far as I understand. So our second major scheme, which we started working on in Cambridge, was the Abode project to the south of the city centre. It's designed by Procter & Matthews, who are quite a well-known housing design architect around the country. We've done a fair bit of work. We'd worked previously with them on Greenwich Millennium Village and a couple of projects in East London. Very early on in the process of Abode, there was a discussion with Peter Studdart again around what were the local authorities' aspirations for the Clay Farm site. And he was very, very clear that what he wanted to see was a design that was an architect-led, a design-led approach coming through. He also was very clear about not to be too showy about aspects in the wider scheme. So keep interest in key areas of the development. And some of that was coming from what we've done in Accordia earlier on, because it actually works quite well. We had, on this scheme, this was the first phase we did, and it was quite a proactive relationship with City Council officers. We did have quite a few changes of officers at one point coming through the process. But there was a desire to get it right. And that wasn't just a desire from the local authorities, it was a desire from us as developer because we have to sell these houses eventually to people that come through the door, and they can go anywhere with their money. So at Abode, we had a very, very strong original concept of how do you deal with a massive, great piece of infrastructure that the county council have built in the middle of that development. So we created a grand court vision. It was very much rooted in the Cambridge tradition of grand courts. And we looked at some of the rural areas about how do you deal with some of the interfaces around that site. So you have things like Woodland Edge. So you have ribbons of development which build upon the old yard patterns that you start seeing in some of those Cambridgeshire villages. We pulled that scheme to pieces a number of times, and actually what we ended up building isn't too dissimilar to the original sketch that Procter & Matthews produced. So when it came to Aura, we wanted to progress the delivery on the site. So we've already had 2 different schemes. So Novo, which was designed by our own architect, internal design team, was the former Glebe Farm site. It's 286 units. It's now fully built out. We're also busy working on Abode, and we've got this other project, which isn't too far away from either of those 2. So we said we had a very good discussion internally about actually where do we see this product being? What do we see this product being, given at the same time we had Skanska and their first residential scheme. I don't know if anybody remembers that. And they were promising some great things about how they were going to change the UK housing market, and obviously sadly did one project and then bailed. How should it come together? So in 2011, the question that we were asking ourselves was, it's going to be around 229 units to accord with the parameter plans. 40% needs to be affordable. That's what the outline section 106 said. Within the section 106, we also had a requirement for 40% apartments, 60% houses coming through that scheme. So what do? How do we create that product differentiation coming through so we've got a marketable product on 3 different sites? We can increase our rate of delivery coming through on the wider development, and how can we create a great place? So in terms of the process, we do an awful lot of research at the outset of any project that we look at. So that research focuses on things like planning policy. We will go through the policy wording, see what it says, see how it could be interpreted. We'll look at things like the outline planning consent. We will review design codes, design guides, anything that we can get our hands on. Some of the highways departments nowadays have their own book of highways rules, and this is what we'll accept. Cambridgeshire, quite lucky, there was a quality charter that's been touched on earlier. We've also got to look at market requirements conditions, because at the end of the day, if we can't sell the houses, we're doing something wrong and we're not going to be in business for particularly long. We had to look at Abode at the technical requirements. Part of the site needed to be raised by around about 1.5 metres from existing ground level to make the drainage work. So it was how did we come up with the best solution? The affordable housing framework brief was another challenge, because that was actually linked to a Cambridgeshire-wide affordable housing programme that Homes Communities Agency had at that time, and which actually was quite restrictive in what housing association could pay for units they were acquiring from us because of funding and design standards and so on. We had to consider viability, and unfortunately nowadays, unless you're perhaps a public body, if you're in the private sector, you've got to be able to make a financial return, and that return has got to be acceptable to your shareholders. Otherwise, simply, you just don't build anything. That money will go somewhere else in the country. We then created quite a complicated brief and actually gave the architects a great deal of information around the context, our vision and objectives for the site, which builds upon the research we've done and the viability issues. We set out what we wanted to see in terms of housing mix. Where did we think the housing mix was going to go? The affordable mix was prescribed. It was in the 106. The private mix, well, actually, what's going on in Cambridge? And this was a time that AstraZeneca had just announced they were coming from Cheshire down to Cambridge and relocating their headquarters. So there was a lot of discussion around that and getting that mix right for what we perceived would be the market. What sort of houses are those people going to want that are coming here for those jobs? Core development requirements were things that are something you'll see in some of our company designs. So it's about actually, is it a functional bathroom? What size bedroom would we like to see in some of these products? How big should the kitchen be? What's in the kitchen? So it's about creating something that is actually functional and works. We then engaged Tate Hindle and came up with the design. So there were various concepts that went through pre-application, stakeholder engagement went on through that process. A lot of design evolution on this project, but there was also a review and audit process. So if we just go back to the design, we appointed at the developer's cost, and it was quite a significant cost, a full consultant team. And the reason we appointed the full consultant team was because we had an early understanding from Abode and Accordia what the local authority wanted to see and the level of detail the local authority wanted to see coming through. That team met pretty much every 2 weeks. And something we tried to do in the design team meetings was to ensure that not only did consultants report progress and say, this is what we've done over the past 2 weeks, but actually what are your issues, what are the challenges, what can other members of the team help you with. So there's very much a collaborative design approach that was taken within the consultant team. So we had Mike and his team saying, well, actually we've done this on another project, helping the engineers out. The engineers saying, actually we think there's a better way to do this because we've done this for another client on this project. So it started to come together as a very open environment within the project team. We had a collective problem-solving approach as well. So that meant if somebody did have that issue and did have an issue, there was a way to get it sorted. We focused on design workshops in certain aspects. If there was a problem that was too big, we couldn't deal with in a design team meeting. And Mike will remember design team meetings going for half a day, I think, or longer. In the early days of the project, we had to try and identify, well, actually, what is the right solution? What can we put on the table that we know will work technically, we know is functional, we know is attractive? So there's very much an open, creative, design-led approach being taken to the scheme. Some of the key challenges we faced were from issues we'd learned from Abode. So it's things like, actually, we know Anglian Water don't like underground drainage tanks. So how do we deal with things like suds? How do we keep them on the surface within such a tight parcel with a reasonably high density? How do we integrate the affordable housing in the clusters the local authority wants to see with homes of the right size that the housing association can afford to pay us for? How do we get that variety of product coming through the development, whether it's apartments, terraces, semi-detached homes, or large detached mansions, as we call them? The aim there was to come up with slightly larger product than we're building elsewhere on the site. So we had that differential in product offering coming through. And just to give you an idea, the units here were ranging from about 550 square feet for a one-bedroom property up to 3,500 square feet for a full 5-bedroom mansion against the woodland edge. And the sales prices were around 400 to 2.5 million. So we're playing with quite a wide sector of the market where there's obviously many, many risks. We had to take into account the master plan considerations and the design code. And we had to develop attractive, workable forms of housing coming through the scheme. And Mike's going to talk you through all of that shortly. Throughout the process, we had various points of stakeholder engagement. And those stakeholders weren't just external, we had some internal ones to get around as well. So for the pre-application meetings, we had key representatives of not just me sat there and the architect. We had the engineers sat in the room, planning consultants sat in the room, the landscape architect. And that was mirrored very much on the local authorities side by the same people from their side sat there so we could have a constructive discussion. We even ended up talking around things like drainage with the drainage officer that Cambridge City Council had at the time. Highways, I've never met anybody whose knowledge is so good as Dr. John Finney at Cambridgeshire Highways, and he's a real asset to Cambridgeshire Highways Department. There was an acceptance on the local authorities side and everybody involved in the scheme that actually development needed to happen in this area and that the outline principles had been established. The authority was suitably resourced coming through this whole scheme, and actually somebody mentioned PPA earlier. This was a phase where we did have PPA, but we were paying for pre-app meetings. So actually we were funding the local authority and saying, right, okay, how much resource, who are you bringing to the meeting, what's the cost? And we were putting our hand in our pocket to get that service and that provision of the right scheme. We provided information a short time in advance to the local authority as part of pre-application packs, and they weren't just, here's some pretty pictures. There was detailed technical information that allowed officers who were interested in the detail to have material input in the process, so that we could talk about, actually, is it a 15mm curb, is it a 25mm curb, are the parking bays 2.4 metres wide, or should they be 2 metres wide to stop people from abusing them? We had a number of internal reviews as well. Our CEO was involved, and for a major PLC, that's quite a thing to have that involvement at that level. We sometimes involved the design team in those review meetings. We had to look at things like buildability. Could we build it? Because we build all of our own projects. We had to talk to our sales and marketing colleagues, actually. Could you sell it? What issues do you see coming through? So there was a lot of design evolution coming out from those internal reviews. Where we then needed to focus on specific technical issues with the local authority and things like bins, bikes and cars that Jonathan was talking about, we had a series of focus workshops, and it'd be half-a-day workshop, where we'd go along, our team would sit down at the Guildhall in Cambridge, and various different officers would come in from different departments of the local authority. So Jen Robertson on waste, she was great. She'd come in and say, oh, you've done everything I wanted. Great. Really happy to see it. She'd disappear after 5 minutes. But it was a nice reassurance for us to know we're heading in the right direction. We had something that pretty much everybody could support. We had the Cambridge Quality Panel as well. Now that, for those of you who aren't aware, that quality panel is a peer review system. It's got a variety of disciplines in it, so it's not just planners and architects. It's got engineers, it's got transport consultants, it's got sustainability consultants. It revolves around the theme of the 4 Cs, the connectivity, community, character and climate. And that review process was actually quite useful for us to confirm that we were heading in the right direction with the design of the projects. And every time we met with the quality panel on various phases across Great Night, we never once had to materially change the approach we were developing and coming up with, which is actually quite a nice reassurance for a developer that you're on the right track, chaps. After the application was submitted, we had a number of post-application briefings of additional parties. So this Cambridgeshire Disability Panel, for those of you that work in that area, it's quite useful to go and have a chat with them because they come up with some interesting feedback. And you can explain to them and have a dialogue about, actually, we have considered how you might get around this scheme in a wheelchair, or how partially sighted people might use this project. We spoke to the local community through the Southern Fringe Forum. By that time, there was an acceptance development was going to come. They were quite interested in what's it going to look like. There was a degree of trust through what we were doing elsewhere on the development. And actually going along with the right information. So we had a wooden model built, which I think is still in your office. That wooden model wasn't a cheap investment for us. As most of you, any architect knows, they're several £1,000s to create one of those. We then, once we got towards the planning committee, had a presentation to committee members. Not many local authorities give you the chance to get in front of the committee before your application is up for decision, to explain where you're coming from on your project. And actually, this is how it's coming together, and to give them the opportunity to ask the questions that Stephen was talking about earlier. It was a nice thing for us because they were genuinely interested in development. There was an acceptance development was going to happen. They had the full support of officers and gave their full support to officers. And everybody was interested in getting the right form of development. So that's a little snapshot around the process we went through to create Aura. And I'm just going to leave you with a few takeaways here. So what we had was a clear buy-in right from the start of everybody into the development vision and concept for the Aura project. Shared objectives were agreed, such as the type and form of housing, the character and the nature of development. And a lot of that was down to Mike and his team and the success of communicating the ideas that they had. We had an open and collaborative environment. Nobody was precious, nobody was wrong, nobody was right. And there was desire and willingness to listen, learn, and achieve the best for the scheme, because this is a development that could be there for several hundred years. We had frequent engagement with officers, and it wasn't just pre-app discussions. I remember Mike telling me I've called Jonathan just for a quick chat, not sure about something, just want to run it past him. And there was that informal engagement process kicking around. ideas were freely shared between not just our team, but with the city council. So the city council were coming along to me and saying, "Got this idea, we've seen this, could you incorporate that? We think that might work." So we were having to go away and do some research and say, well, actually we've looked at that and yes, it will work, or no, it won't work. So that was quite an interesting and challenge, and I don't think a lot of local authorities do that. So the credit of Cambridge City Council, they invested in the growth areas of Cambridge. And that investment in officer time and resource was significant. We had a design team, landscape support, dedicated planning officers. So not people who were doing, I've got a house extension and I've got another 20 applications. All they were there for was to just process major applications coming through and to ensure that Cambridge got the right quality of development out of its growth areas. And the good thing about that approach is actually other local authorities have clearly been talking to Cambridge because they're setting up major growth teams too. So East Herts District Council, for those of you that know it, they are in the process of creating a major growth team to take some of those principles forwards about how development will come up in their area, because they've got things like Gilston Garden Village coming over the next 10, 15 years. So I'd like to thank you all for listening. Hopefully that's given you a really good insight into the process, or a brief insight into the process. Over to Mike, who's now going to talk you through the design and about what we've created.
Okay. Hi, my name is Mike Jameson from Stakeholder Architects. And over the next 25 minutes, I'm going to be talking through Great Knighton and the work we've been doing with Countryside, primarily on the northern part of the Great Knighton development, which forms about 650 homes. As part of that, we'll also be looking at new ways of living that have come about in the development of the general layout principles and the specific house types. But before I do that, I thought it would be worth just talking a little bit about the background to the need for a development such as Great Knighton within Cambridge. Cambridge is synonymous with its university and more recently the biotech industries that came about in the 70s and 80s. And through the links between the many colleges and the biotech companies in the science parks, this brought about significant investment into Cambridge and the surrounding area, putting pressure on the existing infrastructure. And as Stephen and others were saying, that Cambridge was pretty much 100,000 people for many, many years, and that was constrained by the green belt that was formed in the 50s. So you had that conundrum where investment was coming into Cambridge, but how does Cambridge adapt to the kind of changing market forces and the need to stay ahead of the game in a sense? So after many years of discussion, it was agreed that Cambridge should expand, and primarily on greenbelt land, and that was enshrined in the Peterborough and Cambridgeshire Structure Plan of 2003. But importantly, any development that was going to come forward had to avoid putting added pressure onto the existing historic centre of Cambridge. So green forms of travel were absolutely essential. So there was great emphasis placed on cycle and pedestrian movements, park and ride networks. The idea of the guided bus, which I'll talk about in a moment, was a key aspect of the ability to deliver more housing in and around Cambridge over a sustained period. Importantly also, that the architecture that was going to come forward needed to be of high quality. Cambridge has some very beautiful buildings going back through the colleges. If you look at Downing or St John's or King's, and right the way through to some of the kind of modern architecture that you can see here in the image behind me. Many of which is again in the science parks and in the city centre. And Cambridge is the only city that has won the Stirling Prize twice outside of London, with the University of Cambridge's Sainsbury's laboratory, you can see here in the top middle, And then, of course, the Accordia development in 2008 that Countryside developed, which, as mentioned, was the only housing scheme to have won the Stirling Prize and actually set the scene for housing in this area and actually at a national level in terms of urban housing and meeting high density development. So then, just to capture the kind of points I've picked up before, right? Why did Cambridge need to change? Well, you've got the world-class university, you've got the science parks, you've got 1,500 technology-based firms now in and around Cambridge. You've got 57,000 people are currently employed in and around Cambridge. If you think that the population was 100,000, you start to see the kind of imbalance that's beginning to take shape if the housing wasn't addressed in the short to medium term. And so the Peterborough and Cambridge plan here shows the various developments that were proposed that were then captured in the local plan in 2006. You can see significant development happening down in the south here. Great Knighton, the development we're going to be talking about, is shown here. And then to the left of that, you've got Trumpington Meadows, which was touched on earlier on, which is a JV between Grosvenor and Barratt. You have Northwest Cambridge, which is now coming out of the ground. There's more than 600 homes now built in that development, and a further 2,500 to come forward in the short to medium term. And then you have the developments that have been taking place in central Cambridge around CB1, which you may or may not have seen, that's also linked to the station redevelopment work. And this is all possible in part by the guided bus and the additional green forms of travel with the park and ride networks, the cycle and pedestrian routes. And the guided bus which was introduced, which connects the south to the north, is basically a tram system that operates on concrete planks that follows the old Varsity Cambridge to Huntington railway line. And it was used as the most efficient way to move people through Cambridge. And you can see that following the old railway lines, they could use the bridges that existed to enable easy flow of buses through to the centre of Cambridge. And while it's running on concrete planks at the outer edges of Cambridge, when it hits the city centre, it becomes a conventional bus. I'm sure many of you have used that service if you've been to Cambridge. So as we move to the development itself, just to get our bearings, we've got Great Knighton shown in the middle here. You've got Addenbrooke's Hospital to the right-hand side. You've got the biomedical campus just to the left of that. And then you've got Trumpington Meadow situated to the west of Great Knighton. And the yellow line that you see here is the guided bus that links the park and ride network at the end of the stretch at Trumpington Meadows through to the city centre and on beyond to St Ives. And you can see that also cuts across here to pick up the new development that's happening in the biomedical campus and Addenbrooke's Hospital. On the right-hand side, you can see the 20 land parcels that form Great Knighton. And you can see in orange where the guided bus comes through the centre of the development. The parcels that I'm going to be talking to you about today are shown in red, which is predominantly the northern part of the overall development. So Great Knighton comprises about 2,300 homes, but it's not just houses and apartments. There are also other facilities. There's about 30,000 square feet of retail. You've got a community centre, health facilities. You've got a new primary school and secondary school. The secondary school, I think, is the first secondary school for 50 years in Cambridge. And there are also significant landscape features, with the kind of major planning gain being the introduction of a 120-acre park on the eastern side of Great Knighton, which you can see on the right-hand side here, which was previously scrubland in the Greenbelt and which was inaccessible. So actually reinvigorating that part of the development has enabled people to come and use the facilities, both from Great Knighton, but also Trumpington, Addenbrooke's and Long Road that surrounds it. And that park sits in one of the green fingers that permeates through Cambridge. So we're talking about Great Knighton here, and if you can see the green tone that meanders through Cambridge, this is one of the green fingers that is so distinctive about Cambridge. It's basically what was floodplains that have had no development over the years. And if you are in the centre of Cambridge, of course, you'll see along the backs and other areas of Cambridge where you have cattle grazing. It's a really special and unique feature of Cambridge. And here are a few photographs of the park as it stands today. So you've got the balancing ponds situated in the top right. You've got playing fields. You've got a significant amount of allotments. You also have wildlife now starting to use the park. And as part of an artwork programme, we've been working with Future City, who have created a number of installations throughout the development just to entice people to use the park. And this is the hide that was produced about 2 or 3 years ago now. So just looking at the northern part of Great Knighton, you can see the biomedical campus here. AstraZeneca is situated in this location, and they're coming down from the northwest, as Jonathan was saying. When the biomedical campus is finished, it will be the largest in Europe. I think it's the second largest in the world, so a really fantastic facility, which is, again, bringing investment into Cambridge. What we show here is in the centre is part of the park, and then we've superimposed the black of the guided bus, and the orange is the various cycle and pedestrian routes that form part of the outline consent. So you can see that permeability to the park and beyond was paramount in the success of the scheme. So we're not just focusing on Great Knighton itself, it's how to connect the neighbourhoods into the surrounding context. So the next view I'm going to show you is taken from here, looking south across the first phases that we got involved in, which is the northern gateway to Great Knighton. So this was originally farmland, and so we were keen to utilise the historic field boundaries, hedgerows and mature planting that edges the site to inform the way in which the residential neighbourhoods were developing. If you know Cambridge at all, this is Long Road in the foreground. And as Jonathan was mentioning, there was a kind of fixed mix of houses and apartments for this particular part of the scheme. So we had 60% houses, 40% apartments, overall 394 homes in this part of the scheme. And we were looking at about 47 dwellings per hectare, so marginally denser than Accordia. And importantly, we're looking at 40% affordable here. So although I'm going to show you photographs of some very big houses, there are also some small apartments, 1 and 2 and 3 bed apartments, 2-bed houses, scaling up to the larger 5-bed houses that are situated along the edges of the development on the eastern side. So the idea of being able to create variety and the idea of being able to buy into development or rent your first apartment in here, and then as your circumstances change, you can move within the development was quite an important aspect when we were discussing things with Cambridge and the council as the scheme evolved. In terms of the design moves, we've got the spine road running through the centre of the development, which links all the 20 different parcels together. That became Lime Avenue. And then, as you might expect, we've located the apartments along that key road into the development. We have then introduced pocket parks to celebrate the arrival of Long Road, with the marker building here, and a second pocket park in this location, which provides access through to this residential close on the eastern edge of the site, where you have the largest houses, and some of these houses are detached and about 4,000 square feet, so big houses within the Cambridge market. But we're seen as a kind of contemporary twist on some of the houses that you find along Long Road. Around the edges here, we have a horseshoe-shaped arrangement of terrace houses. here and here, and then in the centre we have the courtyards, where we have the smaller houses that are grouped together to create a court that you might find in one of the many, or the 31 colleges in the Cambridge colleges as part of the university. One of the things that Cambridge Council and in particular Countryside were interested in was just how to attract people to the southern fringes. And Countryside, working with Bidwell's, their view was that if we maybe create a slightly different offer, so the apartments tend to be a little bit larger than you might find in CB1 in the centre of Cambridge. So the apartment, say a 2-bed, 4-person apartment, ranges between 77 and 86 square metres, with the technical standards being about 70 metres. So it's about 10% bigger than what you might find elsewhere. That's the same with the amenity provision as well. So you'll find that the balconies and terraces are quite generous here. Again, it was a way in which to attract people to the southern fringes. And that isn't the case everywhere, as I'll mention as we go through the presentation. But certainly to set the scene, it was important to create a differentiation from what was happening elsewhere. The other thing that Countryside do very well is getting in the landscaping early. It goes right back to the days when Alan Cherry was leading Countryside. And the importance of getting the landscaping in at a point where people can start to see the kind of development they're going to buy into. So if you go there now, you'll see that most of the landscaping is already fairly mature, and it's building on the existing landscaping features that existed as part of the farmland setting. So this is a view, actually maybe I should show you, it's taken from this point here, looking back through. So you're picking up the marker building, which is in render, all the way through to the apartment blocks along Lime Avenue, through to the courtyards beyond. And this image shows the variety that exists at Great Knighton, and the way in which the landscaping and the built forms is integrated. So you can see the use of shared surfaces throughout, extensive landscaping, the 2-storey houses in the foreground, and then the scale rising up as you head towards Lime Avenue. This is the marker building that fronts the Pocket Park as you come in from Long Road, and then you can see beyond that just a glimpse of the apartment building that fronts Lime Avenue, and then beyond into the first of the courtyards. It's the view towards the second Pocket Park, where you've got terrace houses situated either side of the central space, with one of the larger houses framing the view, which backs onto the plantation. And in the centre of that Pocket Park, we have an orchard for families to pick the fruit. Over the next few slides, I'm just going to focus on some of the typologies within Great Knighton. This is the Aura building, which is the kind of gateway building as you come into the development from Long Road. It's different in material from the predominantly brick facades that you see elsewhere. And it's been popular with quite a broad demographic, from the over 50s, 55s, through to young families who are looking for their first home. The apartments are fairly generous in size, good amenity provision again. You can see that most of the apartments have 2 balconies on them. And we're looking at about 4 apartments per floor, with the largest apartment here about 140 square metres, which is big. It's a kind of lateral apartment, which is more like a 3 or 4 bedroom house spread across one floor, which has been popular with the over 55s market. Directly to the west, you can see an example of a terrace overlooking the entrance Pocket Park. Again, we worked very closely with the 2 Jonathans to respond to the kind of vision that Cambridge Council and Countryside had for the development. So you can see parking has been suppressed, so you've got on-plot parking situated here, and with lots of use of shared surfaces, blurring the edges between roads and pavements. Tends to have first floor living where you have the opportunity to overlook the pocket park with bedrooms situated above, with the top floor being either a master bedroom or a family room. What we found in speaking to Countryside and the sales team at Aura is that there's been people who had moved from Accordia to this development because the plots are slightly wider. So at Accordia in the terraces, you're looking at sort of maybe 5.5 metres in width. Here, you're looking at sort of half a metre to a metre wider, which just gives you that little bit more flexibility in terms of layouts for furniture and so on, which again has been well received. In terms of active frontage, at the corners, what we've done is we've put the garages to the rear of the properties and dropped the living accommodation down to ground level. And we've tried to avoid having very long runs of terraces, which is good in terms of avoiding a lot of capital lockup, but also it creates additional permeability through the development. And you can see in the foreground we've got a balancing pond, which is part of the SUD strategy, which is fairly extensive throughout the development in terms of the approach. Now it's been working closely with Cambridgeshire Council, but also with BBUK, the landscape architects. This is a view looking along Lime Avenue towards the apartment blocks. I mentioned before that the apartment blocks and houses have been defined by the existing landscaping. And actually what you see here, although the hedge is a little low at the moment, but is the field boundary that existed to the farmland. So actually, if you were to go there now, you'd see the hedge continuing all the way along here. And what we have is a series of bridges that permeate through the hedgerow that provide access into the development on the eastern side from Lime Avenue. We have parking on plot at ground floor level, and then above that you have 4 apartments per floor, stacked with living, kitchen, diner accommodation situated on the corners with large balconies that wrap round the corners, which allow dual aspect both to the pocket parks and to the surrounding streets. And the way in which they are framed up allows, it gives a kind of a strong identity to each of the corners of the apartment blocks, and provides solar shading to the accommodation behind, which was an important consideration. Moving to the courtyards, these inevitably are smaller houses. It's a mix of 2 and 3 bed dwellings. We worked again very closely with Jonathan on the design for these, and the bins and bikes were an important aspect of that. You can see that they're collected in these locations around the edge of the courtyard and then collected together with a canopy that swung round on 3 sides. And what that did do was it created this kind of semi-private spaces at the front doors to each of the houses. You can see the use of soft and hard landscaping, permeable paving, and we worked closely with the highways team on refuse movements to make sure that the courtyards were functioning properly. We also were mindful of creating little breaks in the corners which gave longer views out from those courtyards to the surrounding streetscape. At the other end of the scale, this is an example of one of the bigger houses, which was designed from scratch and responded to the constraints that were and opportunities that were in front of us. So we had a band of mature trees to the north of our land parcel, but we wanted to maximise views towards those trees, but of course it's north facing. So what we did was we had a first floor living space here that was linked to a double height family kitchen diner to the south. Hopefully you can see that in the section here. So that's the formal living space here that overlooks the trees, and then to the rear of that you've got double height space which is linked to that. So you could stand or sit in the formal living space, look out towards the trees or look back towards the garden and get the sun in from the south. And actually you can see the image on the top left-hand side of someone looking from the first floor down into that double height space. Countryside have been really interested in trying to kind of push the boundaries at Great Knighton. And so from these double height spaces, which you don't often find in residential accommodation, but also increasing ceiling heights. So the average ceiling height is 2.7, in some instances it's higher than that. The door heights are at 2.3, which just gives it a kind of slightly grander feel. We worked carefully on the plans to ensure that the windows were positioned in such a way that you could get light running all the way through the plans of the houses. And we'll have a look at some of the plans in a moment. You can see on the right-hand side the high-level terrace. And we've got several of these where they overlook key landscape spaces. And they were linked to either a master bedroom or a family room with sliding doors, so you could crack it open on a sunny day and sit outside. At this point, I thought it'd be worth showing you 4 or 5 different house typologies, apartment typologies in more detail, going from the Aura building, which is one, to an apartment building, terrace, large house, and courtyard. So we've talked about all of these different typologies, but I thought it'd be worth showing you the plans as well. So you can see the Aura building in the top left, 4 apartments per floor. You can see the apartment, this is a 1-bed, but even on the 1-bed, you have two balconies. And the terrace house here on the right-hand side, you've got 2 tandem parking spaces, and then above that you've got the open plan living, kitchen, diner space, and then bedrooms above, and the terrace space that I've just been talking about at the top of the house. And that space beside it could either be a family room or a master bedroom. And then looking at the affordable accommodation, we've got a garage parking, which is really quite unusual for affordable. And then we have a 4-bed arrangement on the first floor with living space directly onto the side garden in this instance. Then we can move to the largest houses that back onto the existing plantation on the eastern boundary. These are 4 or 5 bedrooms entered through a kind of central space with a stair that leads you up through the house. You've got a variety of living accommodation from the kitchen living space here at ground floor. You've got a conservatorium at first floor and a second family room towards the back of the house, each with their own balcony. And you can get a view of the conservatorium here on the middle image. On the right-hand side, you've got the apartment block arrangements, and they range in size from between 77 and 86 square metres, as mentioned. And you can see the way in which the terraces to the apartments wraps around the living, kitchen, diner spaces. Then moving further down the development, we've got the new secondary school, which I think is rather good, by Avanti Architects, which opened about 18 months ago. And then directly opposite that, you've got a mixture of apartments and townhouses framing a new local area of play, which you can see in this image here. And the last parcel I want to talk to you about is the parcel that's currently on site. It's parcel 8, or Hobson Square, and it's situated around the main square to the development, just to the north of the guided bus. It's 251 dwellings. It's about twice as dense as the phases I've been showing you before. So it's 97 dwellings per hectare. So it's predominantly apartment-led scheme. But in addition to the apartments, you've got some houses and about 10,000 square feet of retail accommodation. Again, it's 40% affordable, with a parking ratio of 1 to 1. The diagram on the left-hand side is what was shown at the outline planning stage. And while we thought there was a lot of things that were right, there was a few things we thought we could improve upon. And we worked closely with Cambridge City Council and Countryside to try and improve on those. And to Cambridge's credit, they were very responsive to the proposals that we put forward. So you can see here, on the left-hand side, this is the only part of the development that we were involved in that actually meets existing housing and Trumpington. And so we're mindful to step down the scale of development to address the change in scale along that boundary. But the outline was identifying a donut-shaped block here on the eastern side. And we just felt that was missing an opportunity because you've got these fantastic mature bands of trees that run along the edge of the site, and only half of the apartments are getting the benefit of the views towards it. The other concern was that this route through here, which is the most significant cycle and pedestrian route through the development, wasn't really connecting particularly well to Hobson Square. So we had another go at that. So the plan was to create clearer links through to Hobson Square, turn the blocks by 90 degrees to maximise views towards the trees. And then on the western side, where the route through to Hobson Square was okay, we thought we could improve that by creating a new pocket park, where it in turn increased value to all the properties that overlooked that park, but also created another open space that linked to the open spaces that we're creating further north that then tied down together to Hobson Square, where the guided bus was going to stop. And this was a sketch that was produced for the planning submission. So you can see on the right-hand side the route that was created, and as I mentioned, there's about 10,000 square feet of retail, and the idea was to wrap the retail down into that pedestrian route, so it was creating active frontage all the way along that stretch. And then we were having podiums at first floor level with parking located below. And then on the other side, we introduced this garden square, which was completely car-free. So all parking was situated around on plot and access from the surrounding network of streets. And as part of the urban planning strategy, we had a marker building that was identified here, which was picked out in render, which was perceived as the kind of little brother of the Aura building that you see as you come into the development. What we've done as we've gone through this scheme is we have used simple wayfinding features like changing material to help navigate through the development, because we like the idea of being able to find your address without the need for street names and numbers. So I'm going to show you just a couple more images, one from this point looking this direction, and another, the final image from this point looking north on the garden square. So these are the blocks of apartments with retail below, and the new pedestrian route that was created with the retail wrapping round into the pedestrian route. We've gone for a red brick rather than a buff brick to reflect the change in character. And we've used a white brick here, again, just to mark the entrance into the pedestrian route as part of a wayfinding strategy. And that white brick is also used on the inside of faces of the courtyards to act as a foil to the landscaping. And we used, it's interesting that when Jonathan was talking about some of the design team meetings, and we had this enormous model that was always brought out at the early stages. And we would literally cut it up and move blocks around to try and get the most appropriate layout. And we also were doing BIM modelling on this to ensure that we're getting no north-facing single aspect apartments, but ensuring also that we're getting daylight on all of the public realm and the courtyards for at least 2 hours in March, and that was all checked. And actually that's what brought about some of the breaks that you see in the blocks that were worked through in a collaborative manner during the design team meetings and meetings with the council. Then the final image is the view looking north of the new garden square that was created, which, as I mentioned, is completely car-free. So you've got a mixture of houses and apartments and masonettes that surround that space. And then you've got the marker building picked out in render, which, as I mentioned, is a kind of little brother, part of the family of marker buildings that are located throughout the development that assists in movement patterns through the site. So just to finish, just some of the things that really have made the difference in terms of our kind of working environment for ourselves is that there's been a kind of clear strategy from growth from the outset, as two Jonathans have mentioned. There's been a development framework with design codes, parameter plans. We've worked very collaboratively with the neighbourhood team. The quality panel, as Jonathan was saying, was helpful in the sense that there were a few things that changed from it, not major changes, but nevertheless it was encouraging to hear from the group that we were going in the right direction. And I think one of the key successes is the joined up approach, getting the infrastructure in early, having the guided bus, having an approach to green forms of travel. I mean, how many developments have we been to where the houses are first and the station's coming later? It's been able to get it in at the right time, or getting the schools in at the right time so that people can see what they're buying into, can understand how it's going to work, and that it's not a strain on your family life for the first few years while the rest of the development gets its house in order. And then it doesn't stop once you hand over the development. It's ensuring that once you're in your apartment or your house that people feel comfortable there, and if there are problems that they're addressed quickly and people are aware of what's coming next. I think people can prepare for any changes, and people are resilient, but people don't like surprises, and so it's ensuring that you've got good communication with all stakeholders throughout the process. Yeah. Anyway, thank you.